Welcome back to part 2 of our 3-part series where we continue exploring the world of medicine through the lens of top experts. Let's dive in.
Yeah, I love the idea of the blank sheet of paper. I mean, I was talking, I've practiced on both sides of the Atlantic, and there's problems with American medicine. There's problems with medicine in Britain.
Yeah.
Actually, I can't think of a country I visited where
Yeah.
there aren't problems.
Yeah.
And I've visited a lot of countries. And I just love the idea of having a blank piece of paper, because if you had a blank piece of paper, you wouldn't design the American healthcare system. In fact, where there isn't a healthcare system. There's a disease care system,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't design the NHS as it is. You just wouldn't,
Yeah.
because it was designed. Our system was designed, in 1948. Right? The world is 70. It's 70 over 75 years, 77 years old. It's not fit for purpose. So I love the idea. Blank sheet of paper. What would it look like? So talk us through a typical consultation at your practice. How do you provide patients with a comprehensive understanding of their health and personalized care solutions?
Mhm. Oh, it's so individualized, but in general, I always start with what the practice is about. I always do like a spiel of basically that says, look, I know you're rushed at almost every single physician visits. I want you to like scratch that and just when you're going to tell me your story, I want you the moment it's in your mind, just tell me.
Sure.
And so we have an hour and a half. And I always tell them the most important is your history, like your story. Tell me what's going on. Then we go into the physical exam, and then the blood work are coming much lower. Blood work and X-rays and imaging come much lower, in what's important to me, right? And I start like this, and then I'm like, I tell me your story, and I take note. And I know that in this age of AI, we can have AI take note, but I really like taking notes. I'm like one of those old old timer. I like taking notes, and I like to put them in form so that they make sense for my physician brain. And usually at the end of an hour and a half, I have a very good idea of what's going on. Um, Usually, what's really interesting is I think the speaking heals. And as the patient tells the story, they also start putting things together. They start realizing that there are things that they are doing that might be causing some of the things that they have, right? So yes, they might have rheumatoid arthritis, they might have lupus, they might have all of this, but basically they'll explain flares and what causes them to have flares. Sometimes it has, they don't, there is no reason for them, but sometimes they will have this. And so depending on if we have the time, or if that's the priority, the second part is kind of like going over, closing my computer and just looking at them and just going over, this is what I think is happening. And this is how I think. And I explain how I think as a rheumatologist. And it's really interesting to see that, like, there is so much power in understanding what's going on in your own body, and explaining that to a patient is huge, right? So it's like, all right, so there is inflammation, this is what's going on, this is the inflammation is just your body's way of healing, and sometimes it goes overboard, so we need to calm it down, right? And just explaining that, and how can we do this, and what are we planning in the future, right? So, like in rheumatoid arthritis, we can treat to target. In lupus, we can treat to target, and target can actually be remission in most of the time. So we can explain that. And I think just having this map, this roadmap for them is actually huge, right? Because you're like, oh, I see where you want to go. I see that you're going to remission. And I tell them every 3 months we switch. We switch treatment every 3 months. So then we do a physical exam, and then we wrap up with what was on the physical exam. Does that change my, most of the time it doesn't ever change what I think. Sometimes I just say I think we should be a little bit more aggressive, and aggressive just means, you know that when you have a fire, if there's a fire, you just put a lot of water to put up the fire and then you can back off. But yeah, if you really think about it, there's not a huge difference with the regular visit. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a rheumatologist. I think the difference is that there is time to go, to listen, to hear between the lines, and to have open-ended question. When I say, tell me your story, it's really hard to do this if you only have 40 minutes or 30 minutes or, sometimes 10 minutes with a patient,
Yeah.
because it's an open-ended question.
I
Right?
wonder if you look at the outcome of this, if you actually dedicate time at the beginning of a relationship to listen to what's being said. Um, I, I've learned recently, and this is not intended to come across as sexist, that men have a tendency in conversations with women to. I've learned a new word, mansplaining.
Oh,
That
really?
when men explain,
Why do I know this word for many years now?
well, you see, I'm a slow learner. I'm a slow learner, Isabel.
I was
But
not thinking of a woman.
I fly airplanes for navigation, and if I'm on a commercial airliner and there's a strange noise, or the plane comes into land and doesn't land, or there's a delay, I sit there fuming, thinking, why doesn't the captain press the button and say, ladies and gentlemen, let me explain what's going on? Because I've been on it's called a missed approach, when you're coming into land but you don't land for whatever reason. It's a standard procedure. But I've been on planes and people are screaming. They think something terrible is happening. It would take 2 seconds to come on and say, ladies and gentlemen, we executed what we call a missed approach. It's a standard thing. There was insufficient visibility to land. We're going to come round again, and I'm sure we'll be fine this time around. Nothing for you to worry about. We do this hundreds of times a year. If we did the same as physicians and explained to patients, okay, I know you said that you've got knee pain. Why am I examining your hip? I know you say you've got shoulder pain. Why am I feeling your belly? And
Mm.
explain to the patient why we're doing that. And why am I looking at your nails when you've got abdominal pain? Right. So I'm 100% with you. And actually, the joy of really talking to a patient and getting them to understand how complex medicine is and sharing just a little teeny bit of it. So, building a strong patient doctor relationships is central to your practice. What advice would you give to clinicians to help patients feel safe, heard, and understood? It's tough to do on both sides of the Atlantic, as I've suggested. You've got growing and aging populations, ever more complex medicine, fewer and stressed healthcare practitioners. How do we do it, Isabel? Give us a
I
roadmap.
Oh man, it's just, I think so. We are so different, but the most important thing, when you said it's on the term of patients, I was like, hold on, it's also on the term of the physician, right? Like, this practice is not just on the terms of the patient, and we have to give back a sense of, what's the word? Like, that you're in control, a sense of control to the physician.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and that they are not doing anything futile. I mean, in my practice, I'm just a physician. I don't do any paperwork. I have a team that does that. And I think taking care of the physician is the priority. When the flight is going down, and you don't have air, first you put the oxygen mask on you, then you help the other people. So I think the first thing is to say, well, what do you need to be okay, and what are the boundaries that you're gonna put. So, like, right, like, we cannot stretch physicians so thin that they are feeling that they are not providing good care, because they keep having more and more patients to see in between other patients, right? Like the number of physicians who are telling me, like, the administration is asking me to add 3 patients per day on my schedule. You're like, that's unfair, because we have a certain amount of time, and that, yeah, the doctors can do it 1 time or 2 times, but then after a while you're just burnt out. So the first thing would be to take care of yourself, and it's really hard to say no as a physician, and we want to help and heal the world. And I think we forget ourselves in the process. And the reason why I had not forgotten myself is that I had already dealt with stage 4 cancer. So I knew, I knew that I had to take care of myself. So that's like the number one. The number two, I think once we take care of ourselves, we'll all be much better physician because we have space, we have energy to take care of our patients. So it's almost obvious that we will be better physician, and not it's not a better or worse. That's on this, that we'll have a way to listen to our patient that will make them feel heard and seen, just because we are feeling better, because we are better. And I think that that's what's super important. And I'm again, and we talked about that last time a little bit, about the fact that like you don't necessarily like the word burnout, and I agree with you, I don't necessarily like the word burnt out, but I think a sense of control, a sense of fulfillment, a sense um of of this idea that we matter as physician, right? And one of the things that drove me, actually it drove me out, to be honest, and I went to see my boss several times before I left, before I gave my notice, is I told them, I was like, I did rheumatology to see my patients. My job is not to be a technician, see a patient once, and then have someone else see them. Because I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, we have physicians, long training, very rigorous training. And then now, because there's not enough, we have what we called APP, so advanced practitioners. And so we have physician assistants and nurse practitioners. And they are wonderful human beings, but their training is much less rigorous than the physicians. And so they might be very good in rheumatology, for example, but they cannot look, they don't know the pathophysiology of, I mean, I've made a diagnosis of diabetes, I've made a diagnosis of syphilis this year. You cannot necessarily do that if you don't have the training of a physician. I mean, it was knowledge from, a long, long time ago, and it was the time spent with my patients. But yeah, like this continuing to care for our patients, making sure that we establish that relationship. And to me, if you are seeing the patient once and then it's someone else that sees the patients, then you may see them another time when that someone else doesn't know what to do with them. You're losing time for the patient, but you're also losing that connection with the patient. That to me is so important. Like continuity of care is something that I never quite understood in the US. I couldn't understand why this is not important in the US as it was in France.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's medicine has become transactional instead of, I mean, again, I think there's a very simple model. We're a service industry. At its simplest, we're a service industry. And as a Gallic individual, I know how important food. I saw you smile when I said Lyon. Um, I've
Yes.
never had a bad meal in Lyon. You don't go to a favorite restaurant with the expectation that the person who's cooking or the sommelier is someone you've never seen before. You go there because you like the chef's cooking, you like the service, you like the sommelier's recommendations. And why the hell would you go to a doctor and see someone completely different who doesn't understand you and the nuances of your character? So I'm totally with you.
And that's a wrap on part 2. Thanks for tuning in. Don't miss the third and final episode where we conclude this deep dive series.